Hello, my name is Critic Dominus Rael, and this is easily my most honest and vulnerable video to date. Tonight I went to go see Obsession. A friend recommended it to me, and honestly, I had never even heard of this movie before. I went in blind, hoping maybe I'd have a few interesting thoughts for a review. Instead, I walked out of the theater deeply uncomfortable, and feeling a little too seen. Because Obsession gets men scarily right. And if I'm being completely honest with you, if I was in Bear's position, I fear I might have done the exact same thing. Now, before that sentence gets clipped out of context, let me explain what I actually mean. But first, quick review, because I am a critic. I liked this movie, quite a bit actually. It wasn't scary in the traditional horror sense. I didn't jump once. There weren't really any moments where I felt terrified, but my heart was racing basically the entire movie, and I felt uncomfortable almost the whole runtime. So to me, this wasn't really traditional horror. It was psychological horror, emotional horror. The horror of watching somebody slowly compromise their morality because loneliness finally offered them a counterfeit version of love. And honestly, that disturbed me way more than another demon screaming into the camera movie ever could. I'd probably give the movie around a 7 out of 10, which for this channel is very high praise. So yes, I absolutely recommend going out and seeing Obsession, especially before we get into spoilers, because this conversation only gets more uncomfortable from here. So, spoiler warning. Seriously, go watch the movie first. My favorite scene in the entire movie is honestly one of the least traditionally horror scenes in the film. It's when Ian tells Bear that Nikki lied about her dad having cancer. Bear confronts her, and instead of denying it, she basically goes, "Why does it matter if I'm lying?" And Bear pauses for like 2 seconds before going, "You know what? You're right." And then it smash cuts to them having sex. And internally, I was celebrating. Not because it was morally good, not because I think Bear was doing the right thing, but because it felt real. Painfully real. And that scene honestly told me this movie understood men better than most modern films understand men. This was finally a believable male character, a tragic male character. Because I think a lot of lonely men would do exactly what Bear did in his situation. Not proudly, not consciously, not maliciously, but slowly, incrementally, rationalizing one compromise at a time because for the first time in their life, they finally feel wanted. And that's what makes this movie so disturbing. Not the gore, not the creepy imagery, not Nikki walking backwards or feeding him the cat or any of the supernatural stuff. The real horror is watching a man knowingly choose comforting delusion over painful truth. Because Bear knows something is wrong. He hears Nikki crying in her sleep, begging him to kill her, begging him to free her. The real Nikki does not love Bear, and he knows that. But 70% of the time, the Wish version of Nikki convincingly acts like she does love him. She touches him, sleeps with him, affirms him, needs him, wants him, and for a man starving emotionally, that counterfeit version of love becomes unbelievably difficult to let go of. So Bear lives in denial, because acknowledging the truth would mean losing the only version of affection he's probably ever experienced. And honestly, that felt horrifyingly believable to me. Not exaggerated, not cartoonish, believable. And I think a lot of single men watching this movie probably understood Bear, even if they'd never admit it publicly. Especially men who've dealt with toxic relationships before. Because a lot of guys know exactly what it feels like to see obvious red flags and ignore them because the emotional validation feels too good to walk away from. Again, I am not praising Bear's behavior. I am not saying that he was justified. I'm saying the temptation felt authentic. And I think pretending men don't feel temptations like this is one of the reasons so many conversations about masculinity feel fake and emotionally dishonest. Instead, society often shames men for admitting these feelings even exist at all. Not something to be encouraged, but something to be talked through instead of pretending like they don't feel this way. That just ends up teaching them to be the nice guy instead of being the good guy. The fake guy. This movie didn't feel fake at all to me. It felt ugly and truthful. Honestly, the whole thing felt less like a horror movie and more like a biblical tragedy. Bear isn't really a cartoon villain to me. He's a weak man who keeps choosing temptation over sacrifice until eventually the consequences destroy everyone around him. That's basically ancient tragedy structure, and the ending is brutal precisely because he finally does the right thing, but only after it's way too late. He kills himself to break the spell. Nikki regains control of her mutilated body, mentally shattered and surrounded by all of her friends' corpses. And suddenly, the fantasy disappears. The dream girl vanishes. And all that's left is the horrifying reality of what Bear was willing to ignore to keep feeling loved. That is devastating. Now, as for why I stopped at a 7 out of 10 instead of going even higher, I do think the supernatural side of the movie was a little underexplained. Some of the creepier elements worked emotionally, but not logically. The cat scene, the backwards walking, the weird phone call, the broader mechanics behind the wishes, a lot of it feels intentionally vague. And maybe sequels could retroactively improve some of that by expanding the lore, because right now the emotional side of the story feels way stronger than the actual supernatural mythology. That said, I almost don't care, because the emotional core worked so well for me. Honestly, this movie felt exactly like the kind of horror story the author Dominus Rael would write. And yes, I know there are rumors about his unpublished works. I have no idea how people know about that. But this felt spiritually very similar, because the real horror here isn't the monster. It's the uncomfortable truth about human nature underneath the monster. Honestly, the scariest version of this story to me isn't even the movie we got. The scariest version is a subtler one. No murders, no creepy horror scene, no dramatic breakdown. Just Bear living a long, seemingly happy life with an obedient Nikki, while the real Nikki occasionally cries and begs him to stop whenever the fake version falls asleep. And instead of helping her, he just puts in earplugs. Never tells anybody, never breaks the spell, never sacrifices his happiness. He just lives his dream life while the real Nikki slowly dies trapped inside herself. That is horrifying to me, because that version feels even more realistic. And honestly, that's why this movie stuck with me. Not because I was terrified, not because I'm going to be having nightmares tonight, but because it forced me into uncomfortable self-reflection. And in my opinion, that's way more valuable than cheap jump scares. So yeah, a solid 7 out of 10 from me. Big respect to the director. This movie had real things to say, and it said them in a genuinely clever and uncomfortable way. Excellent job. Bye-bye.